Everyone, tonight we're going to be talking about an awesome topic, starting native plants from seed indoors, a true beginner's guide. We're going to walk you through everything from getting your seeds to cold stratification to setting up your growing area, selecting the right soil, the tools that you'll need, transplanting, and also the timeline for when you need to do everything to start your native plants indoors.
This is such an amazing topic, and we are going to learn so much from Lexi because she has so much experience doing this. She's grown so many of her own plants from seed with great success. So I'm really excited about all the information that she's going to bring us. Before we proceed, though, I want to ask everybody, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to help us get the word out about the importance of native plants and share the beauty of them. So what would be the reason why we would want to grow from seed rather than simply purchasing plants? So number one, there is a huge cost savings. Seeds are a very cost-effective way to grow plants. If you're going to direct sow, which means that you're just sowing, trying to sow seeds in the ground, there's a much lower germination rate than if you're going to do it like the way that Lexi's going to be talking about tonight. So if you're used to just taking seeds and getting a packet of seeds somewhere and throwing it outside and you're like, oh, this never works, seeds don't work for me. If that didn't work for you, believe me, you'll have much more success doing it the way that Lexi's going to be describing. So seeds can be a very cost-effective and successful way to start these native species. You also have a ton of availability of plant species. Even if you go on a website and they're sold out of the plants, you often can still get the seeds. So it can be easier to get some hard to find species in seed form than perhaps in a plant form. You have a personal connection. I was just talking to Lexi about this. I was like, when you grow these guys from seed and then you see them a couple of years later and they're a big plant full of pollinators, do they feel like they're your children? Are you like proud of them? And she said, oh yeah. I mean, it's like it's like to just see them when they're babies and then see them when they're out in nature doing what they were created to do is just so awesome. So growing from seed allows you to witness every stage of your plant's life cycle. And it's a great winter hobby. During the dark days of winter, seeing new plant life is very mood elevating. And here you can see a picture, a gorgeous picture of Lexi's blue vervain, Verbena hastata. And this was taken last year on April 16th when the plant was 8 weeks old. Look at that, 8 weeks old and in full bloom.
And remember this plant. We're going to show you what this turned into in my garden at the end of this presentation.
So as I said, there's 3 ways to grow from seed. You can plant directly outside in the ground. This has a relatively low success rate. I've heard it estimated about 10% of seeds will germinate if you just directly sow them into the ground. Not that it's worthless to try that, but you're going to have much more success, a much higher germination rate if you do the milk jug greenhouses, which you're going to be talking about that in the future, right, Lexi, in another presentation?
Yeah, I'm going to set up a couple this season, but overall, I like the grow inside method. But yeah, that's a great method too.
So, and we're going to be talking, but tonight specifically about the grow inside method, which is probably the most successful method to get good germination with your seeds. Where can you get seeds? Local native plant nurseries, if you have any around you, if you have any nearby. Online retailers that specialize in native plants and native seeds have a lot of availability, and you can usually buy them in different sizes, you know, depending if you want, you know, a quarter pound of seed or 3 pounds of seed, you know, you'll save on quantity, but you can, you know, get it from any of your online retailers like Prairie Moon or Prairie Nursery or some of the ones that we've mentioned in the past. local conservation groups that host and native plant societies that host seed exchanges. Here's a photo of our annual seed exchange. We have one every uh, November, the first Saturday of every November, and we just have people that are part of our organization, volunteers, members that harvest seeds in the fall from their gardens and bring them into the seed exchange, and people can take the seeds that they want. So it really works out well. And then they can start them in their homes that winter. So it's just a wonderful way. It's really extending your garden. You're basically gardening throughout the season. When you're doing seeds in the house, like, so you start that like in February. And so really, and you finish up in your garden like in November, you're closing things up. So you really just pretty much you have 2 months where you're not gardening in some way, right?
Yeah, the more contact with soil that we have, it's shown that actually touching earth makes us feel good and lifts
Mhm.
our mood.
Absolutely. None of that sad disorder when you're under your own grow lights.
That's right.
And you can collect seeds from your own garden or a friend's garden. So the seeds that you worked with, you primarily harvested a lot of them from your own garden. You
I
got
harvest, yeah.
plants, you grew plants, and then you harvested the seeds and then grew a bunch more plants from those seeds.
Yep, and I got a lot from the seed exchange, which is really fun because it's free. It's like free shopping. You fill out your little envelopes and pack up the seeds that you want to try. And then you know that those are definitely local and from your area. And then I did get a lot from Prairie Moon Nursery as well. So a combination of all.
Okay, ordering seeds online. Verify the native status. Be sure when you're ordering seeds online that they are native and they're not cultivars. If you are trying to go for a straight species natives, use resources like the USDA plant database to ensure that the species that you're looking at is native to your area. Um, they might be native to the Southwest or the Southeast and not to your area. So try to stick with ones that are native to your area. Buy the seeds sourced from nearby regions if possible. They're more likely to thrive in your local conditions. So the closer to where you live that those seeds are sourced from, the hardier they will be. And many believe that that is actually that they're better for our local ecosystem as well if they are sourced very close. If you can't get them very close, just get them as close as you can. Maybe purchase your seeds from the next state rather than, you know, 2,000 miles away, so try to just get it as close as you can, depending on what is available to you. Check for organic or untreated seeds. This ensures that the seeds are free from harmful pesticides and safe from pollinators. Remember, whether we're dealing with plants or we're dealing with seeds, we want to be sure that they are free from neonicotinoids. That is a must. And we talked about that in a previous video and how harmful those neonicotinoids are to our pollinators. It's the seeds that are actually treated with the neonicotinoids, which is a pesticide, and it then spreads and goes through the system of the entire plant from the seed. So, and it can be very harmful to pollinators who then go to feed on that plant. So we really, really want to make sure that whether we're getting plants or seeds, that they are neonicotinoid free. So if you're online looking at seeds from an online resource, look on the website. It should say that it's neonicotinoid free. If it doesn't say that, before I would place an order from them, I would call and be sure that it is. Okay, this is so cool. This is what the seeds look like. So sometimes when you're harvesting seed, there will be like a big cotton tuft attached to it. Like if you're talking about milkweed or there a lot of like woodiness around them from the surrounding of the seed, from the flower, from the areas of the spent flower. But you can see how truly small the actual seeds are when compared here in each of these photos to a dime. The first one is what Annie's hyssop looks like. The second one is black-eyed Susan, what that looks like. And the third one is what the seeds of foxglove beard tongue look like. And so some of these species, those seeds are like a pinpoint. They're so tiny. You need your reading glasses on to see these guys sometimes. Here we have what rose milkweed or swamp milkweed seeds look like, and they're actually kind of more fine and papery, like wafer-like. They're very thin seeds. And then we have purple coneflower, and then we have the wild blue indigo or Baptisia australis. So that's and most of these seeds, and especially these three right here for sure, and a good majority, the majority of flowering plants, and certainly native flowering plants, they will not produce seed without a pollinator. We have some plants that can that can kind of pollinate themselves, that can wind pollinate, but most of our flowering plants and our native flowering plants, they really need that pollinator to pollinate. And then think of that, every little flower, like if you look at that bee up there on the purple coneflower, or even over by the blue wild indigo, every flower, every little individual flower that this bumblebee is pollinating on that coneflower, which is basically a cone made up of all these little tiny individual flowers. So each one of those tiny individual flowers that bumblebee pollinates will produce a seed. And so you might get hundreds of seeds off of that, or 50 seeds or whatever it is off of that one coneflower. Whereas like with the wild blue indigo, that'll actually pollinate that flower. And if it pollinates, and when the flower is pollinated, it'll actually form a pod because the blue indigo is in the pea family. So it's very interesting when you start looking at the different forms that these seeds take, but it all comes back to the pollinators, and we wouldn't be getting these seeds, and the plants wouldn't be able to reproduce and live on if it weren't for these pollinators pollinating each one of those individual flowers. And like over to the left, we know how important milkweed is to our monarch butterflies, our declining monarch butterflies. And monarch butterflies, butterflies in general, and moths, they do pollinate. They are pollinators, but their pollination is pretty insignificant when you compare it to the pollination that bees do. Butterflies and moths, like I said, they are pollinators, but their biggest contribution to our environment is more through their caterpillars on plants and how those feed birds, and it moves up the food chain, and they directly take the energy from plants and it goes into animals in the form of birds that eat those caterpillars. So that is really where they are just a powerhouse of our ecosystem. When it comes to pollination services, it's the bees. They are by far, far the most effective pollinators. And when you really think of it, we always think of milkweed for the monarch butterfly, but when you plant milkweed, you're going to see tons of pollinators on it. You're going to see bees, you're going to see wasps, you're going to see beetles, and of course, you're going to see butterflies. And it's those bees that are largely pollinating that milkweed and forming seeds. And then those seeds blow, form new plants, which is helping the monarch butterfly. So these guys are even the way they're interacting with plants, they're not only helping the plants, but they're also helping each other through the services they provide. So when you start looking at the interconnection of all these species, it's really beautiful. It's just so beautiful. And as I said, seed creation depends on pollinator. Most flowering plants rely on pollinators to create seed, from bees and butterflies to birds and beetles. These incredible creatures transfer pollen, enabling plants to reproduce. So the plants were created to be attractive to pollinators. so that the pollinators will come. So they both service each other. The pollinators get their food from the flowers, and the beautiful flowers that attract those pollinators ensure the plants will reproduce. So they're working hand in hand for both of their uh, reproduction and continuing forward and making more generations. Native plants like rose milkweed, purple coneflower, blue indigo depend entirely on pollinators. And without pollinators, the cycle of life for, wait a minute, I can't read this. I gotta move this little picture over. Ignore that. Here we go. The cycle of life for countless plants and the ecosystems that depend on them would be disrupted. So the takeaway here is protecting pollinators means protecting the future of our plants and our planet. And as you can see here, look at that, the cute face on that bumblebee right there. And he or she is feeding on white mountain mint. I'm not going to say the Latin name.
Is that a carpenter bee? I might have mislabeled this picture. I couldn't really tell
No,
from
no,
the
that's
back of it.
I think, well, it's kind of hard to tell from here. In the way you would tell a carpenter bee, the the way you would tell, I mean, because there's another bee in the back that looks like it's a little bit different too. So a
Yeah.
carpenter bee would be very big, and it would have a smooth, shiny torso, the black part, the body, whereas bumblebees have fuzzy hair on the body. So I can tell for sure that the one in the back is definitely a bumblebee, and I kind of think the one in the front is too, but I'm not 100%.
Okay, well, somebody in the audience, if we've got it wrong, let us know. I'm sure you will.
Yeah. Take
All
it away,
right, so
Lexi. Give us your insight.
now the fun continues. So germination codes are not universal. So I'm going off of the ones from Prairie Moon, and they're specific to the nursery or the organization that provides the seeds. And they're really used as a tool to communicate to growers about what they've found to work best for making sure that the seeds germinate. So Prairie Nursery has got their own system, and they use a coding system, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I think there might be another couple letters. We're just going to go over a few of them tonight, the simpler ones. Some of these seeds need multiple levels of a heat or a cold treatment, scarification, where you're breaking the shell of the seed in order to germinate. So we're going to just go over kind of the simpler ones. And Prairie Moon has a resource here, how to germinate native seeds. So if you want to learn more about their process and how they figure these things out, you can check that out. But on their website, every single seed that they sell will list a germination code. And the C30, we're looking at this for rose milkweed. That means it needs cold stratification for 30 days. So let's look at our table of germination codes and look at some of these other ones that we might encounter. So germination code A, this is the simplest, no pre-treatment is necessary. So something like purple coneflower does not need any pre-treatment. You can just plant that in a warm location and it'll start growing. Some seeds need a hot water treatment to break their shell and to really get things going. C, and then there'll be a number of stratifying days in parentheses. This is the number of cold, moist stratification days needed. And typically you'll see C60, C30, and maybe C15, like the wild blue indigo. That is a C15 or C10. It only needs a couple of days in the refrigerator to get that experience of the cold stratification. And then D, you'll see this on really tiny seeds, like maybe wild strawberry, but if they're very small seeds, they may need light to naturally break their dormancy and germinate. So for those types of seeds, you definitely don't want to cover them with any soil on top. They need to get as much light as possible in order to break their dormancy.
I understand the idea of stratification, of cold stratification, and I know you'll be talking more about that in a minute. But I'm just wondering that the seeds that need hot water treatment for the shell to break, I wonder what in nature, when like a seed is just falling from a plant and it germinates, I wonder what in nature mimics that.
I think that one might be similar to the scarification. I could be wrong, but some of these seeds really depend on having a creature interacting with them to try and help it. So something trying to eat the seed could naturally mimic scarification, which we would do with like sandpaper. So, or, some kind of rough soil might mimic that too. But yeah, that is kind of a curious one
So
as
maybe
to.
like even like a seed that's buried by a bird or buried by, I mean, just like their teeth on it, like damage it enough or whatever to get it rolling.
Right, exactly. Yeah, these things are not perfect or in isolation ever in nature. So, what is cold stratification? Many native plant seeds have evolved to require a period of cold and moist conditions before they can germinate. This mimics the natural winter dormancy period they would experience outdoors, ensuring that seeds don't sprout prematurely during warm spells in late fall or early winter, which we sure get a lot of those in our region, don't we, Kathy?
Absolutely.
So they're so smart. They know what to do. And this adaptation helps native plants synchronize their growth with the optimal growing season in the spring. So, whereas when we're growing indoors, we have to try and figure out this kind of timeline to mimic everything. It works perfectly in nature. And here we're looking again at blue wild indigo and what that plant looks like when it's all grown up. But like Kathy said, this is in the legume family, and they actually look like little kind of bean pods, don't they?
hmm And they're actually, I have people walk by, I have some wild blue indigo in my front, and people almost comment more when it's full of the black pods. They comment how beautiful the plant is, in addition to when it's in flower. The pods themselves are very attractive. But I'm just thinking it's how I used to, years ago I just hated winter. And I guess I'm still not a fan of January in Chicago, but when I started realizing how dependent we have beautiful plants here. I just feel like the Midwest has just beautiful plants. I think our trees are beautiful, our oaks are beautiful, our prairie plants are beautiful. And these plants and these seeds, most of them, they need that cold weather. They need 30 to 60 days of cold weather to germinate. And it makes you almost appreciate those cold winter days because you know that they're helping nature do its thing. They couldn't do it without the cold.
That's so true. And I read online yesterday, I think, just about how the snowpack actually delivers nitrogen into the soil. So some of these things that we just take for granted, they all have a purpose in nature. And us better understanding the relationship between all of these things just helps us ensure the safety of nature and that it's going to continue. So what you'll need for cold stratification, some unbleached coffee filters. This is what we're going to put our seeds in. Then we wrap that up in paper towels, and we're going to show a little video of how you do the cold stratification in just a second. You'll find all these things, I'm sure, around your house. A metal sieve in a bowl, some gallon freezer bags. You want to label everything, permanent marker and address labels. And you can reuse your gallon freezer bags over and over again when you do this from season, year to year. So definitely you can use these supplies over again, everything that you're going to be using for your cold stratification. So what we're going to do is we're going to treat the seeds, which is very, very simple. And we've got a little video to show you here. This is rose milkweed, and we're getting them ready for cold stratification. So we've lined a sieve with the unbleached coffee filter, put in just enough seeds so that they can spread out across the coffee filter. You don't really want them like on top of each other. You don't want any like situations where mold could grow. So you want to keep them kind of free and clear of each other. And you just kind of let that water filter out and definitely use some filtered water. So like from a Brita or something like that. And then you just fold your little coffee filter, maybe spray around the edges in case something didn't get a full amount of water on it. And then you're going to fold it up into thirds, like a piece of paper, and put it into your marked Ziploc bag. And the nice thing about these Ziploc bags, they go right into your fridge and they can just stack on top of each other. They don't take up a lot of room. And you want to go back and check them. So You probably don't need to check them every week, but for a C30, I might check on them twice just to make sure that the paper towel and the coffee filter has not completely dried out. And so if you have something longer, like a C60 seed, you definitely want to check on those a little bit more frequently. Sometimes things can sprout in the fridge, and if they do sprout, you got to plant them right away. I've had Jacob's ladder sprout in the fridge, and that's a C60 seed. So definitely check on those ones that need to be in there for a little bit longer.
So
So this,
if somebody were to go in there and check the seeds and if the paper felt dry, should they spray the paper with some more water?
yes, great point. So yeah, you definitely need to get your little sprayer ready. And if it does look dry, spray them again. And you don't want to have it sopping wet. It just needs, enough to be moist and not too much because again, we don't want to encourage mold growth or like seeds rotting. So just enough to keep it moist. So this is probably the most confusing part is when you're supposed to get started. And I started last year way too early. And I think anybody who's grown things will commiserate that if you start too early, if you're too gung-ho, it actually is not a good thing because you're going to have huge plants growing and it can be very tricky in the spring, waiting for that last frost date to get your plants in the ground. So I think a good method of how to think about this is first of all, look at your last frost date in your area. So us in the Chicagoland area, we are about April, end of April, April 15th to the 20th, I believe, is going to be our last frost date potentially here. There's also an old adage in our area that you can never plant anything before Mother's Day. Have you heard that one, Kathy?
Yes, for sure. But I've always thought that maybe that means more tender annuals in plants. I mean, in
Yeah.
pots, because you were getting a lot of times those are tropical and so on. So those tend to not do well if it gets colder, but maybe like our native plants can withstand a little bit colder.
Yeah, I think they could withstand a little bit colder. But yeah, depending on how cold the spring runs, a good target date I'd say is May 15th. So especially in our area, we're not going to have any scorchers usually by that time, but it should be warm enough that things will be nice and ready to get out into the ground. So now we've got to work backwards. That puts us at March 15th for 8 weeks of growing time. And remember that first picture that we looked at on the first slide of that gorgeous blue vervain? That was only 8 weeks old. So that tells you how big a plant can get in 8 weeks. And this is also at March 15th. This is the time when we can plant our germination code A seeds that don't need any treatment whatsoever. And we're also going to plant our stratified seeds at that time too. So everything goes in our trays March 15th, and that gives us 8 weeks growing time. Now, you just need to remember that some plants are going to grow a little bit faster than others. Some are going to love your conditions, and some are not going to like your conditions. But if you try a couple different species, you'll get to know them and see what they like and how to be successful with them. So then if we work back another 2 weeks prior to March 15th, we're at March 1st, that's when we would want to do the stratification of our C15 seeds. So like blue wild indigo, that one would need to get stratified and go into the fridge March 1st. Then let's work back another 2 weeks for our C30 seeds. They need to be in for 30 days. That would be February 15th. And finally, our C60 seeds, which would be January 15th. So this may need to be adjusted a little bit for your region, but I started cold stratification last year, I think in December, and that was way too early because I had huge plants by April, and I was like, when is it going to be warm enough to get these things in the ground? So, really try to hold off and get your design, your plans in order for what you want to do in your garden, and think about which plants you want to try growing and which plants you might just be purchasing from a plant sale or online too. So try to work out which ones are going to fall into each category for you. And here's just a reminder of the NOAA interactive map. There's a link in the description for this video of how to find your last frost date. And again, the last frost date here in the Chicago area is between April 21st and 30th. And that's going to give you a good idea of when you can start your plants by working backwards. So what are you going to need for your indoor growing setup? Now, there is a little bit of a cost, of course, to getting started with growing indoors, but you need to remember that you could be growing for many seasons and using this equipment over and over again. And also, a tray of 38 plugs, I believe, is about, if you $4 a plug, it's about $160. So the cost of these supplies could equal just one tray of plants if you think about it like that. And whereas a packet of seeds is only $3.50, and you could grow 50 to 100 plants for one packet of seeds, depending on how many are in there. So a little bit of a commitment to getting started, but it's really a rewarding hobby and something that's really fun to do. So what do you
I'm
need?
just,
You
you
need
just had me thinking, people that have large landscapes, or like if they want to put in like massive amounts of some kind of a sedge or a ground cover under a big wooded area in the back of the yard where they need like massive coverage, how much more economical this would be for them.
Exactly. And like depending on your setup and how many trays you can accommodate with your lights and your shelving or your racks. I mean, I think I had 24 trays of 38 plugs last year. So that would have saved me probably about $4,000 in plants. So it can really add up if you want to do some pretty big projects. I also donated a lot of plants to like a Girl Scouts garden and some other friends who want to plant. So it just becomes a really fun thing to do and also a way to get engaged with your community too.
And a good way to get more people planting native, because that gives them one less excuse not to. When you say, here's some free plants.
Exactly. They're free. And we know that there's a shortage of native plants. There's going to be more demand than can actually be filled. So by us growing and contributing to the number of native plants, get those things in the ground and we're a step forward. So we will need some full spectrum grow lights, and we're going to look at this in just in the next slide too, but they need to be full spectrum for sure. I really like this brand. A lot of this stuff is available on Amazon. I'm not trying to promote Amazon, but just if you want something easy that can get delivered to your door, this is Barina was this brand. Wire shelving or racks, you can attach these lights with just some zip ties, and the zip ties are really helpful. You can use chains too, because you might want to lower and shorten the amount of height between your lights and the tray. So we'll get into that too as we look at the different racks. The timer is a must. The plants are going to need between 12 and 16 hours of growing light, and then they're going to need between 8 and 12 hours of light being off. And so here, this one's super easy to program. I used to be really afraid of setting timers, but this one was very, very simple. And then an oscillating fan. You got to make sure you've got air movement going on. If you have a ceiling fan, if like you're doing this in a garage and maybe there's a ceiling fan in there or in a basement, that can work too. But that has got to be on all the time. That I can't stress that enough. You got to keep the air moving. And then please, before you turn on all of those lights, make sure that your electrical capacity is sufficient. These are LEDs, so they're not huge wattage, but you do need to make sure that you're not going to blow a fuse by hooking up a lot of lights. So, maybe hooking up 6 lights isn't going to do it, but if you hook up like 36 lights, that could do it. So just check to make sure that you've got the right proper electrical situation for what you're going to do.
Well, that's a good point. And do you have any recommendations, Lexi, about, starting small? Like, what's a good number of plants to start out with your first year so you don't get overwhelmed?
Yeah, for sure. I would say, and we're going to look at this too. There's a complete kit that comes with wire shelving, the lights, and the timer. And I would say maybe do 1 or 2 trays of the seedling trays, and we're going to look at those too. And just start with a couple of species and get used to the cold stratification method, maybe some seeds that don't need cold stratification too, so you can feel the rewards a little bit quicker. But yeah, definitely start small so you don't feel overwhelmed. The worst thing is if you get to spring and you have a lot of plants and you're just not sure what to do with them. So I definitely recommend going on the smaller side. All right, so full spectrum, what does that mean? Full spectrum emits light across the entire visible spectrum and mimics the natural spectrum of sunlight and works for all stages of plant growth from seedling to maturity. So it'll have some UV light, it'll have some red light, and these ones are like a really nice bright daylight color. So they will work for everything. And again, I said the seedlings need 12 to 16 hours of light daily and 8 to 12 hours of darkness. Some people just do 12 hours on, 12 hours off. That's an easy math to do. These lights need to be positioned 2 to 4 inches above the seedlings, especially when they're just starting and you just planted them. So they need to be very close. So they're getting that sunlight and reaching for it. And then you want to maintain a room temperature of 65 to 75 degrees for optimal germination. You know, some seeds and maybe for vegetables too, sometimes people use heat mats to warm up their seedling trays. I tried that and I felt like it dried things out too much. So I don't know, maybe other people have had better experience with it, but I don't think it's really that necessary for some of the easier ones to grow. Maybe for something that needs like a double dormancy with a cold and a hot situation, that might be necessary, but just the room temperature at 65 to 75 will do it. And you can always get a thermometer that measures your temperature and your humidity. The humidity can actually be more of a problem because if you have super high humidity, you could be encouraging mold and some other things like algae that happen with a too humid situation. So definitely if you're in a basement, that could be more of an issue than like in a garage or somewhere that's a little bit closer to above ground.
Can I ask about something you just said? Are there some seeds that are much more involved to germinate? You mentioned something like a cold period, a hot period. So are there some seeds that actually need the cold of the winter and then the heat of the summer to germinate, that they have to go through multiple seasons in order to germinate? Is that what that means?
That's correct. And those are the more complicated ones, and I've just avoided those because I wanted a little bit more instant gratification. I wanted plants for that summer, to be able to go out and plant. So I think, yeah, as we get better at growing and understanding how those different seeds work and germinate, then, take on the challenge. But for those
Well,
kinds of
this really
plants,
makes sense now because when we order plants for our plant sale, not all species are the same price. You know, there are some species that are significantly more expensive than the average. There's kind of like the average that maybe 60% are, then there's maybe another 30% that are higher than that, and then there's maybe 10% that are much more expensive. And I'm kind of understanding now that must have to do with how long it takes to germinate or how labor intensive and difficult those plants are to germinate, and that's why they're more expensive plants.
yeah, like something like wild ginger, I really wanted to grow it at home, but it has one of these more complex germination codes. And so I avoided it. But I think that's also one that's a little bit harder to get and more expensive. And that could be why, is because yeah, that's a really good point. It takes more love and care to get that thing to go. So this was the shelf light and timer kit that I was talking about. I'm going to show you some pictures of how I had this set up in my growing area. But the thing that I really liked about it is that you can put your seedling trays on the top shelf and get those going really close to the light. Then when they start to get a bit bigger, you move them to the middle. And then when they're pretty big, then they can go to the bottom. So this is a nice way to structure your growing area and a relatively reasonable cost, I think, to get started. This is $179. Sometimes they have a sale, but it's by that same manufacturer of the lights, the Barina. And I just thought it was a good quality product. And you've got your rack and everything ready to go, and even a timer. So that's everything you need, and get it
How
right delivered
easy
to your
are
door.
those racks? How easy was it to assemble those racks?
That was very easy, and it also came with the chains and the zip ties to tie up the lights to the shelves because you got to make sure that your wire shelving, is kind of open so that you can attach and loop that system over to hang your lights from. And then the lights just interconnect. There's like a little wire that goes between each of them. And so they're kind of chained together. And then there's one connection at the end that goes out to your outlet and to the timer.
Like on the top where you have the two trays for when they're little seedlings so that they can be close to the light. On one rack, how many of those trays would you say you could fit on the top shelf?
On the top, you can only get one 200 cell seedling tray up there. And we'll look at this in the next one of the next pictures, I believe.
Okay.
So yeah, you can only get one up there. So I actually did two of these racks like side by side, and then I could have at least two seedling trays going at the same time. And again, you don't have to start all of your seeds right on the same day. I mean, that's kind of a lot to plant 200 seeds, 400 seeds. You might get a little tired from standing. So, don't feel like you have to do it all in once. You can kind of rotate and stage these things. And if everything doesn't get into the ground by May 15th, like that's totally fine. You can still be planting throughout the whole summer up until the fall. So if you want to, wait until something gets a little bit bigger and looks ready to go, you can do that. So here you can see two of those side by side, and I kind of go over the middle of one of them and the bottom with those plug trays there. But you're constantly kind of moving things around because when you're getting your seeds started and they're on those top trays, they might only be in those trays for like 2 weeks. And then you're filling up your plugs. And then your plugs are starting to get going. And then if they get really tall, you're going to move them to the bottom and move things that are just getting going again to the middle shelves. So it's a little bit of a dance of moving your plants around. And you can also fit a lot of pint containers or gallon containers for things that have gotten bigger. Those can go in between things as well. And, feel free to use like recycled things. I've used like mushroom containers. I've reused every little pot that I've gotten from our plant sales. These things can be used over and over again, but you definitely have to wash them and sterilize them in between uses because you want to make sure the seedlings have a great chance at survival and are free of disease.
What do you sterilize them with?
So just like a bleach and water solution, so like 10% bleach and then the water, and that's enough to kill anything.
Gotcha.
And then, so last year, like I said, I went a little crazy, and these were 8 foot long racks that we had gotten for storage of like bins in the basement. And I decided get rid of all of the bins and just put my plants on there. But I could get 24 nursery trays on here. So that's 1,000 plants I could fit on these racks. And it was really exciting. But yeah, depending on how ambitious you are, I mean, this is not, this might not be for everyone, but it is possible to grow a lot at once.
I just think those little baby plants are so cute.
Oh, they're so cute. And I mean, it's just so exciting to see them. I
And
visit
they're
them
just
every,
like saying, I'm gonna grow up and I'm gonna feed all the pollinators. I'm gonna grow up and save the monarchs.
exactly. And you got to talk to them and, interact with your plants. They'll tell you everything that they need.
I think they've proven that if you talk to your plants, the plants do better.
Yeah. So this is what you'll need for starting your seeds and for the transplanting. So nursery flat trays. These you're going to use for your nursery seedling trays, which is the next picture over. You'll put that in that tray. And then you can also use it for the plugs. So once the seedlings are ready to go in the plug trays, they can go right into here. I can't stress this enough that you need a heavy duty flat tray. And I really liked the weight and quality of this one I've got here. Because first of all, that nursery seedling tray, you don't want it to sag and have, an area in the middle that's like closer to the bottom of the tray versus the sides, which are higher. You want to make sure that's like nice and flat and even, especially for the seed starting process. And then when it's a nice heavy weight for that tray and you put your plugs in there and that's going to have more soil and be a lot heavier, when you end up taking that out to the garden, that's going to be a lot easier to deal with and carry. And it's not just like some flimsy plastic. And again, these things, we'll use them over and over again. And then you might just need some miscellaneous pots. It's always good to have nursery pots on hand. These are some 6-inch pots, so a little bit bigger, but also the pint containers are great to have. And if you go to plant sales or buy any other plants, just save all of that and you can keep reusing it again and again. So what do you use to get the seed started? So the first part, when they're in the little trays, and that's a 200 cell tray, you don't want to use any kind of soil or like potting soil because they need something really light that they can the seed can sit in, and it can reach to the light very quickly, and it can get growing fast. So this is from Fox Farm. It's called Cultivation Nation, and it's cocoa coir and perlite, which does not have pathogens, and so not having that helps prevent the fungal issues and diseases that can happen with our seedlings. And cocoa coir is an environmentally friendly material that retains moisture well and ensures consistent hydration for our seeds without oversaturation. And then the perlite, this helps with the drainage of the water, and it's also nutrient free, which is really important because a lot of these seed starting mixes will say that they have things to help your seeds get started. Well, with native plants, it's a little bit different. They actually don't need nutrients like that or fertilizers. So even with the seeds, the native plants will prefer low nutrients initially, but then once they get growing, and this is why we actually transplant them, the seedlings are going to need the nutrients. And so we're going to look at when that happens, but it's once they start developing the true leaves, we're going to need to transplant them into a different medium, which is actually some potting soil. And from the same company, Fox Farm.
Now, I just want to ask,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
what is the texture of this stuff? Is this kind of like a potting mix? Is it more powdery?
No, the cocoa coir actually looks like it's coconut shells like ground up. So
Okay.
it kind of feels like that texture. So
Oh.
yeah, it's not like soil at all. It's very, very light, and it's just optimized for drainage. Okay, so from the same company, and I love their labels and their names. It's just so fun. They have a soil called Happy Frog. There's also one that they have that I think it's like ocean something, ocean floor maybe. And but that one has a little bit more nutrient content than this one. So this is their lowest nutrient content potting soil, and it contains the mycorrhizal fungi and beneficial microbes to support root development, and it's fertilized with natural ingredients. So not like any synthetic fertilizers like you might find in Miracle Grow or something. Lightly fertilized with bat guano, earthworm castings, and aged forest products. Aged forest products would be like broken down leaf mulch or maybe some sticks. So it's got a nice mixture of these nutrients that our native plants would expect to find in the soil that they're going to go into. So native plant seedlings often thrive in moderate fertility and benefit from the less concentrated nutrients of the soil. So this is what we're going to
And I
transplant
just,
our plants
that you
into.
just got me thinking how amazing these native plants are because they don't want excessive fertilization. They don't want excessive nutrients. And then, when they're established, they really don't want any at all. And when you think of how polluted our waterways are with algae blooms and so on from all of the nutrients, all of the fertilizers that run off of our farmlands and lawns and so on. And these native plants, we're trying to cut back. We don't want all those nutrients that are getting into our water system. So they're just another proof they're just amazing plants.
Yeah, and it's like the same in the garden. If you try to fertilize a native plant, it's going to get leggy and it's not going to grow well. And the same thing happens to the native seedlings if you try to use that kind of soil inside. Also, your plants could get way too big too. So this will prevent that from happening. All right, so watering, identifying, and transplanting, just a few more tools that you're going to need. So that spray mister, you're actually going to need that for the cold stratification too when you're checking, like Kathy was asking, and you want to just spray them to make sure that they're staying wet. But you definitely need this when the seeds are in the seedling tray, the 200 cell tray, because you're going to want to mist them with some water to keep that cocoa coir wet. A small, gentle watering can, these cheapo, like $3 watering cans are great. I think you can find them at like, most home centers, but this one lets the water out very slowly. There's probably other ones too I've seen with like kind of a pump mechanism, but this thing works great. And then have plastic gallon water jugs filled up and ready to go. Now, this is a really important trick. You want to make sure that the chlorine has a chance to evaporate. So anytime you're filling up your spray mister or your watering can, take these plastic gallon water jugs, fill them up with water, and just leave them open with the lids off for 24 hours, and then that chlorine is going to evaporate. So you'll have your water ready to go. This is a seedlings dibber and widger. The dibber is the thing with a cone, and that's what we use to make holes in the soil so we can plant the seeds. And there's usually a measuring line which tells you how deep you're going into the soil on the dibber. And the widger is usually to get a plant out of a container without harming it. So that's a really useful tool, especially when you're getting to like the plug stage. Okay, I cannot emphasize this enough, and this was a big learning point for me that you need stainless steel tweezers. So this one came with a pack of three. I ended up using the first one and the third one the most. The first one I would use to plant my seeds, and we'll see in a little video of how we use the tweezers to actually get the seeds into that seedling tray. And then the one at the bottom I would use to pull those little seedlings out of the seedling tray and put them into the plug. So this, I've got little stubby fat fingers, and when you're touching these tiny little seeds, you need a way to like pick things up and not drop them and not hurt the little seedling too when it started to grow. And then just some stake tag markers. There's probably a better like biodegradable option. I just reuse these over and over again. So I might just use both sides of them, or, sometimes the marker has worn off, just right over that thing. You could use popsicle sticks. There's all sorts of things you can use for the markers. Even reusing them from other plants that you've bought and just put white tape on them, that'll do. So nothing fancy there. You just need to know what you've planted and where. Okay, so here we're going to show you how to plant your seeds. So you've got your seeds cold stratified. It's somewhere around March 15th and you are ready to go. So the first thing you need to do is take that 200 seed tray and you're going to put it in the nursery tray so it's got the basin below it, and you're going to fill it with the seed medium and moisten it slightly. So again, we don't want things to be super waterlogged, but just enough water that it's moist. Place 1 to 2 seeds in each cell, following the depth instructions on the seed packet. And this is pretty important. It'll say plant no deeper than the width of the seed. And we'll look at that in the next little video coming up. But you use your little your little dipper to make a hole in the little cell there, and then we'll put the little seed in there. Some very small seeds, like something like wild strawberry, you may not be able to accurately put like 1 to 4 seeds in each of those little cells, and you might just end up sprinkling it on the top. That's okay. They will still germinate and they'll figure it out. So again, keep that soil moist. You can use a spray bottle when you're in this stage, and then you can also use the bottom watering method, which we're going to go over. And then usually these trays come with a plastic cover. It's good to keep that on before your seeds have sprouted. That just keeps all of the moisture in and keeps us nice and wet for them. And you just want to make sure that you remove the plastic cover once you start to see your seeds sprout. All right, so here, hopefully our little video will play, but this is the seed tray. And here I'm using the dibber to put the little holes in, and we're gonna plant some milkweed seeds. So here I'm showing you with those tweezers how important that is. And I use my finger, I kind of just like keep my place with my finger because it can be really easy to forget where you are. And then you just want to kind of like push the little cocoa coir around the seed to cover it up. You don't really need to put a whole nother layer of soil. That can be a little bit tricky when you're dealing with the little seeds. So just covering it up should be enough to get you going. And then just give that a mist and cover it up. And then we wait. That's the hardest part. I think once you've got it started, it's like you keep looking every single day for a sign of life. So definitely check your trays twice a day. What you see in the morning could be vastly different from what you see in the evening. And it just becomes this fun little game of like, wow, how many popped up since then? And like, oh my gosh, I've got, 8 blue wild indigo. And what am I going to do with them? So, at this point, it's super exciting seeing them and seeing these signs of life in the winter.
Do you
So
find that they grow more like at certain times of the day? But then again, I guess in the grow lights that like, so do they seem to grow when the lights are on or when they're sleeping?
It's definitely when they're on. So from morning to evening, that's when I've seen like, and I'd go back and check in the evening. I'd see a huge difference. Like, wow, that actually did a lot during the day. What was I doing? Look at what this plant has been doing. And, these are 8-day-old seedlings right here, and just how big they can get in that short amount of time is pretty phenomenal. But don't be discouraged if not everything in your little, cells sprouts. They're never all going to sprout, and some species are going to have a higher germination rate than others. So just make sure you follow the instructions for the cold stratification, get those number of days as right as you can, and then see where you go from there. One other thing I just wanted to mention while we're talking about the seed trays is I like to break them up with different species. So I might do 3 species in one of those seed trays and just put markers of where each of those species are, the beginning and the end of that section. To do a whole tray of 200 of the same species, that would be a lot of plants of the same one. So if that's your goal, then that's great. But if you want to try a lot more, you can definitely section off these trays. And it's great that they're so small because you can get more in there under one set of lights.
Did you ever have it like, like let's say most of them, you're a week out and you're starting to see like most of them germinating like that. Is there ever a time where there's like stragglers where you think that there's a few cells that are dead, but then all of a sudden, like a week later, they pop up?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So usually between days 4 and 10, you'll start to see a lot of stuff sprouting. But sometimes things can take 30 days. They could even take 45 days.
Oh,
So
so don't dump those cells too
yeah,
quick.
don't dump them. I would say give it a good eight weeks even, if you can just keep it watered and keep it under the light and see what happens. Because, until you get really familiar with the species, you're not going to know what to expect. And another good point with that is to keep a little journal of what happened this season so you can learn from it for the next season. All right, so some tips about watering. You definitely want to water in the morning instead of at night. And this gives the water time to evaporate before the lights go off at night. If you water at night and it's just kind of sitting there, then that's a good opportunity for mold or other funguses to grow. So we don't want to do that. I mentioned this before, but definitely fill up several gallon jugs with water and leave those lids off, and that's going to dechlorinate that water. And having that all ready to go is going to make, taking care of everything a lot simpler. And then watering deeply and less frequently to encourage deep root growth. I would say this is really more of something when you're at the plug stage or the pints, you've moved your seedlings. Though that's when you want to really focus on watering deeply, but it helps them establish a strong foundation and makes them more drought tolerant later on. So how we're getting them started early in life actually sets them up for success later on. And then try to not get water on the leaves to prevent disease. I've also seen if I haven't treated water and it might have like high chlorine content, that could also affect the leaves too. So you want to make sure that you're trying to avoid the leaves as much as possible. And here we're looking at 8-day-old rose milkweed seedlings just popping up. And this was a successful batch. Look at how many germinated. So that was pretty exciting. And then if you look at the bottom of your seedling trays, you can see the little roots popping out. So one thing that you can do is the bottom water method, and that actually will absorb up into the little cell itself. And you can do this with your plugs. You can do it with the seedling starting tray. You don't want to leave a ton of water sitting in these trays, but you can definitely fill it up with water, let it absorb up into the cocoa coir, and then drain it for 15 to after 15 to 30 minutes. But you can leave a little bit in there at the bottom. If you look at these roots, like searching for water already, and we know how extensive the native plant roots are, this is just the beginning of it. So giving them a little bit of water to find in the bottom is great. So if the soil surface remains dry after this bottom watering technique, definitely mist the top of the topsoil to keep it evenly moist, especially when they're in the seed growing or the seed starting tray. You want to keep that moist as possible.
So the bottom watering does not take the place of the surface watering. It
Well,
can be something that's nice to add to, but you still need to water from above.
Well, actually, it does take the place of the surface watering, especially when we get to the plugs, because if you put enough water in that tray, it's going to absorb up into the plug itself, and you don't need to water at all. So that watering method is actually really good when your plugs are actually getting big, because you can't even get your watering jug in there without hitting those leaves. So then you just stick to the bottom watering method. It seems that with the cocoa choir, I would want to remove any excess water from these for sure because they don't have a lot of medium. That little thing is only about an inch and a half, 2 inches, I think. So you don't really want all that water sitting there, but just a little bit is okay for those roots to kind of find. Whereas there's more medium within the plugs that can absorb that water into them. Okay, so this is super fun and a fun word to say.
Yeah, this is a new word for me. It's
Yeah,
always a good day when you learn a new word.
and we're both going to try to say it.
Cotyledon,
I think so. Cotyledon or cotyledon.
cotyledon.
Yeah, so cotyledon leaves and the true leaves. So the
Write
cotyledons
that
are,
down and use that for Scrabble.
yeah. So they are the first leaves that emerge from the seed, and they're part of the seed embryo and provide nutrients to the seedling during its early development. So again, think back to that cocoa coir and that it doesn't have any fertilizer in there. It's got all the nutrients it needs to get itself going. And if you think about some of the, really bad soil conditions that native plants can sprout in, they've got all the nutrients they need in their embryo. So if we look at these pictures here, the first one, we've got rose milkweed, and the cotyledon leaves look a little bit different from plant to plant, but some of them can look really similar. So this is another reason to label your trays because when they're at that very early stage, you might not know what they are. And then the true leaves kind of pop up in the middle and they'll start to look like the actual plant. So we know that those rose milkweed leaves have kind of a more flat, oval kind of shape to them. And then the next picture is of purple coneflower. Again, this looks like the plant, just a really teeny tiny miniature version of it. And finally, we have our gorgeous wild geranium. And look at that baby little leaf. I mean, that is just so sweet to see that true leaf coming out. All right, so how do we know when we need to transplant from the seedling trays and get them into bigger containers? So again, once those bigger true leaves appear, that means that they need more nutrients. So we need to move those seedlings into our bigger
I'm sorry, wait,
containers.
that kind of happened on its own. You're not ready for this, are you?
That's okay. We can talk about this. This is fine.
Okay,
So here we're showing the transplanting process, and we've got some pint containers here, so they can be pints or they can be the plugs, whatever you want to use. You fill them up with your soil, and you want to make sure you get that soil nice and wet. So here I'm using that gentle watering can to fill them up. You make a hole into each of those, and then you use your tweezers to pull them up. And these are only 2-week-old plants, and like, look at those roots. I mean, it's just kind of astonishing that these little baby plants have this massive root already. Look at
that's
that one.
native plants for you. And we were saying, because those are blue indigo, right?
Yep, these are blue indigo.
And blue indigo take 2 to 3 years before you'll get them to flower because they're putting their first couple years energy into forming a very deep taproot, which means that you'll never have to water them as the years go on. But you can already see those taproots trying to form on those guys.
Yeah, it's just so exciting to see. And so that's another sign that they need more room to grow. Just water them a little bit when you put them in. And actually, before you transplant them and they're still in the seedling tray, make sure that is like wet before you stick your tweezers in there. If it's dry, then things can like crumble apart, and then you're more at risk of damaging the roots or the seedling itself. So just try and get that wet before you move it over and use the tweezers. They're going to be a really good tool to use. So just thinking about some issues that you could encounter, leggy seedlings, you want to move your grow lights closer to the seedlings. So that means that they're stretching too far to get to the light. Damping off, this is when a seedling looks like it's doing well and then all of a sudden it dies. It's usually from overwatering, but make sure that you're using sterilized containers and you're using that soil that we mentioned that, something that's definitely free of the pathogens, that's clean. And when you're also moving into the potting soil, that you're using something that doesn't have any fertilizers in it. If you have low germination rates, this is perfectly normal. So this is part of the process. Don't get discouraged. One species you plant, you might have a 90% germination rate, whereas another one you might have a 10% germination rate. I always have had low germination rates on Jacob's ladder and on wild geranium, but if I can get, a good 10 to 15 plants out of one seed packet, I'll take that. That's great. So, just be patient with all of that. Algae or mold on top of the soil. Again, this one can be kind of common. You need more air movement and ventilation, or there could be too much humidity. Make sure the fan is on for 24 hours a day. And then if you do start to see any of these things appear, scrape off that mold and algae and just throw it away. You could also put a fresh layer of soil around the plant where that mold and algae was appearing, because that'll smother anything that was still existing there. If your plants get too big, this probably means that you started too early, like me, that I had that problem last season. So don't plant your seeds any more than 8 weeks before your last frost date. The less time they spend indoors, the better. And the reason why we say that is because of, the humidity conditions, and we want the natural wind. We want the natural sunlight. That's where they're going to do the best. So, 8 weeks inside is a good amount of time to get them growing and big enough to go outside. All right, so when are my plants ready to go outside? They're going to tell you. You're going to talk to them and they're going to tell you when they're ready. But here you can see some really healthy plants and
What do they
they're,
say to you? They say, I'm sick of you. I'm moving out.
yeah, I'm tired of the basement. I'm tired of the garage. Let's get the show on the road. It's time, it's time for the pollinator party. I got work to do. So, they're anxious to meet their friends outside too. So in these trays, the back tray is some sweet black-eyed Susan. I think I also had some Virgin's Bower in there, which be careful if you try to grow vines inside, because if they get too big, they might grow up some things in your
Did
basement
you
or
wake up
garage.
one morning all encased in vines?
I swear one of these racks was like all vines. I had to detangle a lot. So I don't know if I would do Virgin's Bower again inside. That was a bit too ambitious. Um, Anna's hyssop, this one had a really great germination rate too. And I know it's one of your favorite plants, Kathy, and I just have grown to love it too. It's an awesome plant. But these ones are definitely ready to go outside and they can get pretty tall. So it's better to plant them a little bit shorter so they do that big growing when they get outside. And then here's some Jacob's ladder on that top shelf and geranium, wild geranium there. The bottom shelf is basil, but those ones are definitely ready to go outside. Those are like dinosaur looking Jacob's ladder. Those things got pretty big. So ready to go
They
out.
they look so healthy.
Yeah, those ones made me really happy. They turned out great. And here's some black-eyed Susan. Actually, this one on the left is black-eyed Susan and also on the right. So sometimes like different containers or different lights can give you different colors on the leaves. And that's fine. I mean, they're going to grow up to be, the big plants, but it can also be an indication that something might not be quite right with some of the soil or something. So just keep an eye on it. As long as it looks healthy, that's okay. But overall, those ones did fine outside. And then in the back there, we've got that blue wild indigo ready to go out. Just a beautiful fan structure to that leaf. And I just love that plant. All right. And one other thing you can do is when you're transplanting the seedlings or getting them ready to go outdoors, put them in like a covered area, like a porch or somewhere where they've got a little bit of shade so they're not in the direct sunlight, especially at that time of year, early or mid to late May, early June. Sun's getting more and more intense, so they still need to adjust. Even though they've been under those grow lights, the intensity of the sun is is different than what you're going to find with the grow light. So you can choose a cloudy day or plant in like the early evening so that they have some time to acclimate and they're not like out in the burning sun. So you just want to make sure when you transplant that you water thoroughly around the base of the plant. And for something like a lead plant seedling, I would definitely protect this one with a little wire cage to make sure the rabbits don't eat all of it, because they could really like that plant. But this one is 5 months old, so some plants do take longer to grow, and things with like the long tap roots might take longer. They're focusing on their root growth, and some of the woody stemmed plants, those can also take longer to grow.
Yeah, lead plant is a slow one. It takes about 3 years of a lead plant before you really have a plant that it's like blooming, starting to bloom. It's worth the wait. They're amazing. They're a keystone plant, but they are developing that taproot. You're right.
All right, so remember that plant that we looked at the beginning of the presentation, the blue vervain? So that first picture we looked at, it was 8 weeks old. And this video is showing the plant at 6 months old. It was planted outside mid to late May, and the plant like tripled in size. So in
That is
four
just, that
months,
is amazing. That's 1 year.
this is a 6 month old plant. So
That's
yeah, this is
just crazy.
It's just amazing what these plants can do. And actually, the black-eyed Susans as well, they were started at the same time and all of them flowered like that. And that is just from, this one growing season. So even year one, you can get flowers on your plants. You can attract little sweat bees like this one. Look at how cute he is going into that little flower. So if the plant, loves the conditions and the blue vervain likes wet soil, this was in a pretty wet area of the yard. Black-eyed Susan isn't super picky. But yeah, they just thrived. And, these are the rewards of seeing your work and how quickly, native plants can fill in and just look so beautiful so soon.
Those colors are stunning together.
Yeah, I love the purples and the blue combination. And also trying different variations of the sweet black or the black-eyed Susan. So the sweet black-eyed Susan gets a little bit taller than Rudbeckia hirta, and just mixing them together gives it a little bit more depth. So we'll also look at a video of plants that are year two plant. You can't always expect your plants to flower that first year, and something like purple coneflower is probably not going to flower the first year. So this is a year two plant. And look at this big fat bumblebee. This one's definitely a bumblebee, not a carpenter bee. And we've got a cute little butterfly there below him. Oh, he
Yeah, but the
pushed him
big
off.
bumblebee chased him away, said, I want that flower.
Yeah. So these are the rewards of growing your plants and visiting them each season, seeing them come up in the spring, attracting all of the pollinators and flowering, and then, producing seeds for the next season. And it's just such a magical thing to be able to do in your garden, with your friends, in your community. So we really encourage you to try and grow at home. It's a really fun experience. And let us know if you try it out, how you do, or if you have any tips. If you've been a grower for a while, let us know your experience. And
Yeah,
yeah,
we'd love to know your experience. And Lexi, this was fantastic. I mean, you just really made this so much more clearer and it just looks so fun.
it is
And
fun.
don't be afraid to try anybody. I mean, the worst that could happen is you don't have, that many germinate, but you'll probably do way better than you think. And anything is better than nothing, and look at the fun. I mean, think of it. You're starting to garden, like I said, in February. So I mean, it just
It's
it's just like a cool experiment. And then you can share these things and you can give them away, or plant them in your yard. Just have fun and don't worry. If it doesn't go well, it doesn't go well. Oh well. Everything's a learning process.
exactly. Everybody has to start somewhere, and anything that we do, we're helping our ecosystem thrive. So,
And
so
then
next.
please share with us your experiences with growing from seed. And thank you for joining us. Remember to like and subscribe. and we'll see you in the next presentation.
Thanks, everyone.